What if everything you thought you knew about Stoicism was only half the story? We often picture Stoics as stone-faced figures, unshaken by emotion, masters of detachment, who shut out the world to avoid pain. But here's the surprising truth. The greatest Stoic minds weren't indifferent at all. They were some of the most sensitive observers of human nature the world has ever known. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." That's not the voice of someone who turned away from life's complexities. It's the insight of someone who leaned in, who paid attention with almost painful clarity. This is the paradox at the heart of Stoicism. Their strength didn't come from numbing themselves to the world, but from seeing it more vividly than anyone else. Think about it. How could Seneca write so piercingly about grief if he hadn't felt its weight himself? How could Epictetus teach us about resilience if he hadn't first noticed how fragile human hearts truly are? Their wisdom wasn't born from avoidance, it grew from a relentless, almost poetic attention to the subtleties of life. They didn't just endure suffering, they studied it, dissected it, and in doing so, found a way to alchemize it into something meaningful. That's what we're exploring today, the practices that transformed these thinkers into masters of emotional intelligence long before the term even existed. This isn't just about ancient philosophy, it's about how to live with eyes wide open in a world that often rewards distraction. How did Stoics cultivate such profound awareness, and what can we learn from their ability to balance clear-eyed observation with unshakable calm? By the end of this journey, you'll see Stoicism not as a shield against feeling, but as a way to feel more deeply without being overwhelmed. Because the real power of Stoicism isn't in shutting out the world, it's in learning to see it and yourself with unflinching honesty. Stoicism never asked us to become statues, cold and unfeeling. Instead, it taught something far more revolutionary, the art of holding emotions without being held hostage by them. Seneca put it perfectly when he said, "We should not rid ourselves of passion, but rather make it an ally." That's the key. Stoics didn't ignore anger, grief, or fear. They became students of those emotions, learning their rhythms so they could respond instead of react. Imagine a sailor who doesn't deny the storm but learns to read the wind. That's the Stoic approach, emotional mastery through attention, not avoidance. Take modern leaders known for their composure under pressure. The best don't suppress frustration. They notice it rising, name it, and choose how to channel it. A CEO might feel the heat of a failing project but pauses to ask, "What's this anger telling me? Is it about the setback or my own expectations?" That moment of observation is pure Stoicism in action. It's the difference between lashing out and leading with intention. This is where Stoicism becomes practical, not just philosophical. Think back to a time when you felt overwhelmed. Maybe during an argument, your pulse raced, but instead of snapping, you took a breath. In that pause, you weren't weak. You were exercising the very sensitivity the Stoics revered. Because true strength isn't in silencing emotions, it's in listening to them closely enough to decide their role in your life. The Stoics weren't detached. They were deeply attuned, and that's how they turned raw feeling into wisdom. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, but his greatest conquest was mastering his own mind. Every night by candlelight, he would open his journal and do something extraordinary. He would watch himself think. His meditations weren't just philosophical musings. They were a mirror held up to his own soul. In one passage, he writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Notice what's happening here." He's not dismissing his emotions, he's observing them with the precision of a scientist studying a rare phenomenon. When frustration arose in court, he didn't suppress it, he later dissected it on the page, asking, "Why did this irritate me? What does that reveal about my expectations?" This wasn't just ancient journaling, it was radical self-awareness in action. Modern psychology calls this metacognition, the ability to think about your thinking. Aurelius was doing cognitive behavioral therapy 1600 years before it had a name, when he wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." He wasn't preaching detachment. He was urging us to become detectives of our own minds, to notice when we're distorting reality with fear or ego. Here's where it gets practical for us. You don't need to be an emperor to benefit from this practice. Next time you feel a surge of anger in traffic or anxiety before a meeting, try what Aurelius did. Press pause and ask, "What story am I telling myself right now?" That moment of observation creates space between stimulus and response where wisdom lives. Modern mindfulness apps teach breath awareness, but Stoic journaling goes deeper. It's not just about calming the mind, it's about mapping its hidden currents. Try this tonight. Write down one strong reaction you had today, then ask 3 questions Aurelius might have posed. 1. What triggered this feeling? 2. What assumption lies beneath it? 3. How might someone wise view this differently? This isn't navel-gazing, it's building emotional architecture. Just as Aurelius transformed the chaos of ruling Rome into clarity on the page, you'll start seeing patterns in your reactions, turning raw impulses into intentional choices. The ink becomes the chisel and the page, the marble where you sculpt a wiser self. Epictetus knew suffering intimately, not as a philosopher in an ivory tower, but as a slave whose body bore the scars of cruelty. Yet his greatest insight wasn't about chains, it was about the mind. He taught that we suffer not from events but from our judgments about them. Picture this: 2 people lose their jobs. One spirals into despair, convinced life is ruined. The other sees it as a chance to pivot. The event is identical, the suffering isn't. Epictetus put it bluntly: it's not things that upset us but our opinion about things. That's not indifference, it's radical clarity. To distinguish between what we can and cannot control requires relentless attention to our own thoughts, like a gardener who knows weeds from flowers at first glance. Consider modern stress. You're stuck in traffic, late for a meeting. Your chest tightens, hands grip the wheel. Epictetus would ask, is the traffic yours to control? Or is it your reaction that's truly steering you? The frustration isn't in the cars ahead. It's in the story you're telling yourself about wasted time or consequences. That shift in perception isn't passive acceptance, it's active awareness. A Stoic doesn't ignore the delay. They notice the tension in their shoulders, question the urgency they've imposed, and reclaim the moment. Maybe they listen to an audiobook or use the pause to reflect. The traffic hasn't changed, but the suffering dissolves. This is where Epictetus' sensitivity shines. His teachings weren't about suppressing emotion, they were about tracing it back to its source. When he said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do," he wasn't advocating robotic discipline. He was urging us to examine the gap between our expectations and reality. Think of a time recently when you felt wronged. Maybe a friend forgot your birthday, or a coworker took credit for your idea. The sting didn't come from their actions alone, but from the meaning you assigned them. They don't care, or I'm not valued. Epictetus would challenge you to test those judgments. Is there another explanation? Could the friend be overwhelmed? Might the coworker genuinely believe they contributed? This isn't about excusing others. It's about freeing yourself from unnecessary pain by seeing the story behind the story. Try this today. Identify one small frustration you misjudged this week. The slow barrister, the sudden rain, the unanswered text. Ask yourself, what did I assume about this situation? Is that assumption true or just one interpretation? That pause is where Stoic sensitivity becomes superpower. Epictetus, the former slave, knew true freedom wasn't in controlling the world, but in mastering how he saw it. And that begins with the courage to look closely, not just at life, but at the lens through which you view it. Seneca's letters reveal a mind that didn't just understand human emotion, it honored its complexity. Writing to grieving friends, he didn't offer hollow platitudes or demand they stay strong. Instead, he met them where they were, saying, "Let your tears flow, but let them also cease." That balance between feeling deeply and refusing to be drowned by feeling is the hallmark of Stoic sensitivity. In one letter, he consoles a mother who lost her son, not by minimizing her pain, but by acknowledging its weight. You do not wrong your child by grieving, but you wrong yourself if you grieve without end. Notice the nuance here. He doesn't shame her sorrow. He gently redirects her toward the life still waiting to be lived. This mirrors modern therapeutic approaches like grief counseling, where the goal isn't to erase pain but to help someone carry it differently. Therapists often encourage patients to make space for their emotions, exactly what Seneca did when he wrote, "We should cherish our loved ones with the understanding that nothing is ours to keep." His letters were exercises in emotional precision, dissecting anger, envy, and fear with the care of a surgeon. When advising a friend prone to outbursts, he didn't say, "Stop feeling angry." Instead, he asked, "What does this anger want to teach you? Is it protecting you from some deeper hurt?" That question could easily appear in a contemporary cognitive behavioral therapy session. There's a practical lesson here for all of us. Think of a time when someone's empathy made your burden lighter. Maybe a friend sat with you in silence after a failure, or a coworker acknowledged your stress without trying to fix it. That moment of being truly seen didn't weaken you. It gave you the courage to keep going. Seneca's genius was recognizing that resilience isn't built by ignoring emotions, but by examining them with curiosity and compassion. His letters teach us that wisdom isn't cold or detached. It's the ability to hold someone's pain in your hands, study its contours, and say, "This too is part of being human." Try this exercise today. Recall a recent emotional challenge and ask yourself Seneca's two questions. First, what is this feeling trying to show me? Second, how can I honor this without letting it define me? That shift from resistance to dialogue is where Stoic sensitivity becomes transformative. Just as Seneca turned his correspondence into a masterclass in emotional intelligence, your own reflections can become letters to your future self, full of the hard-won clarity that comes from looking inward without flinching. The Stoics practiced something called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. At first glance, it might sound pessimistic, imagining worst-case scenarios before they happen. But here's the twist: it wasn't about dwelling on fear. It was about developing the sensitivity to anticipate life's turbulence without being shattered by it. Seneca captured this perfectly when he wrote, "The man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive. That's the key." This practice wasn't catastrophizing, it was calibrating. By mentally rehearsing challenges, loss, failure, criticism, Stoics weren't inviting misery. They were inoculating themselves against surprise, training their minds to respond rather than react when storms hit. Consider how modern entrepreneurs use this same principle. A startup founder doesn't just visualize success. They play out potential pitfalls: a key client walking away, a supply chain disruption. But here's where the Stoic difference lies. They don't fixate on the fear of these events. They map their responses in advance. When the blow comes, there's no panic, just a quiet shift to plan B. That's premeditatio malorum in action, not avoiding reality, but engaging with it so thoroughly that anxiety loses its grip. You've likely done a version of this yourself. Think of the last time you prepped for a difficult conversation, maybe asking for a raise or addressing a conflict. You probably rehearsed not just what you'd say, but how you'd handle pushback. That mental rehearsal didn't make you more anxious, it gave you clarity. The Stoics took this further, applying it to everything from financial loss to mortality. By regularly asking, "What if this happened?" they stripped adversity of its power to destabilize. Try this exercise today. Pick one worry gnawing at you, a work deadline, a health concern, a relationship tension. Now imagine the worst realistic outcome, not fantasy disasters, but plausible challenges. Then ask yourself, how would I navigate this? What resources do I have? Who could I lean on? You'll notice something extraordinary. The moment you shift from "what if" to "here's how," the fear shrinks. That's the genius of premeditatio malorum. It transforms vague dread into a series of manageable steps, turning sensitivity to life's uncertainties into a source of strength rather than paralysis. The Stoics didn't just brace for storms, they learned to dance in the rain long before the first drop fell. Stoicism teaches us that silence isn't empty, it's fertile ground for understanding. Epictetus, who spent his early years in slavery, knew the power of listening deeply before speaking. He warned his students, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." That wasn't just etiquette, it was a radical practice of humility. In a world quick to judge and slow to hear, Stoics cultivated the discipline of suspending their own voices to truly absorb another's. Musonius Rufus took this further, calling silence the safe course and remarking, "How many regrets arise from reckless words and how few from quiet observation." These thinkers weren't advocating passivity. They were training in the art of emotional archaeology, digging beneath surface conversations to uncover the real needs and fears hidden below. Modern psychology confirms what the Stoics intuited. The most effective communicators aren't the loudest, but the ones who make others feel heard. Think about the last time someone fully listened to you, no interruptions, no rehearsing their response while you spoke. That rare attention doesn't just convey respect, it creates safety for vulnerability. A partner sharing anxieties about work, a child describing a schoolyard conflict. These moments deepen relationships not through advice, but through the silent strength of presence. The Stoic approach flips our cultural script. Instead of "how do I make myself understood?" they asked, "How can I understand more completely?" Here's where it gets practical. Try an experiment today. In your next conversation, focus entirely on listening without planning your reply. Notice the urge to jump in with solutions or anecdotes. That's your ego craving the spotlight. Resist it. Instead, watch for the subtle clues in tone and body language that most miss. Is your coworker's complaint about deadlines actually about feeling undervalued? Is a friend's offhand remark hinting at a deeper struggle? Epictetus would call this seeing with your ears, recognizing that every word carries layers of unspoken truth. The rewards of this practice are profound. When you listen this way, conflicts lose their edge. A heated debate becomes a search for common ground. Even solitude transforms. You start hearing your own thoughts with the same patience, distinguishing wisdom from noise. That's the Stoic secret. By mastering silence, we don't just understand others better, we finally hear ourselves. Marcus Aurelius often turned his gaze skyward, finding lessons in the quiet rhythm of nature that others missed. In his journals, he marveled at how the fig tree exists to bear figs, the bee to make honey, and the human to cultivate reason. That wasn't poetic decoration, it was a masterclass in attention. For Stoics, nature wasn't just scenery, it was the original textbook on resilience, interdependence, and impermanence. Watch an oak tree weathering a storm. Its branches bend but don't break, roots holding firm while leaves release what they can't keep. That's Stoicism in motion, strength through flexibility, endurance through surrender. Modern science now echoes what Aurelius sensed centuries ago. Ecologists speak of forest intelligence, how trees communicate through fungal networks, warning neighbors of drought or disease. The Stoic practice of observing nature wasn't passive, it was training in systems thinking. When Aurelius wrote, "Whatever happens to you has been waiting to happen since the beginning of time," he saw existence as a vast web where every thread mattered. Today, that perspective feels urgently relevant. Climate anxiety grips many, but the Stoic response isn't despair or denial, it's the recognition that we're participants in, not owners of, this intricate system. Here's how to put this into practice. Find a single tree, any tree, and spend 5 minutes studying it like Aurelius might have. Notice how its bark patterns tell stories of growth and survival. Observe the way light filters through leaves, each one a tiny solar panel sustaining the whole. You're not just looking, you're practicing what psychologist Ellen Langer calls sideways attention, learning focus without force. Ancient Stoics called this prosoph, the art of mindful presence. When your mind wanders to worries, gently return to the tree's stillness. Its roots don't fret about tomorrow's weather. Its branches don't resist the wind. They adapt, and in that adaptation find their durability. What does nature whisper to you? Maybe it's the patience of a river carving stone over millennia, or the teamwork of ants building colonies grain by grain. Share those lessons not as abstract ideas, but as lived experiences, because the deepest Stoic wisdom wasn't found in scrolls alone. It was written in the seasons, waiting for anyone willing to pay attention. History remembers the Stoics as pillars of resilience, but rarely as models of compassion. And that's a distortion we need to correct. Hierocles, a lesser-known Stoic teacher, gave us one of philosophy's most beautiful images, concentric circles radiating outward from the self to family, community, and ultimately all humanity. His instruction, draw the circles closer, not to erase their boundaries but to let care flow more freely between them. This wasn't abstract idealism, it was a practical guide for engaging with others' pain without being consumed by it. The Stoic approach to compassion wasn't about hardening the heart, it was about strengthening its capacity to hold more without breaking. Consider the modern caregiver, a nurse, a parent, a social worker who witnesses suffering daily. The exhausted professional who still finds reserves of kindness for their 10th patient isn't suppressing their fatigue, they've learned to channel it. Like a Stoic, they practice what psychologist Charles Figley calls compassionate detachment, the ability to be fully present with someone's pain while maintaining enough emotional space to remain effective. When Hierocles spoke of drawing circles closer, he wasn't advocating fusion, he was teaching discernment. A firefighter doesn't jump into a blaze without gear. Likewise, Stoic compassion means bringing your full humanity to another's struggle while wearing the protective layer of wisdom. You've felt this tension yourself, that moment when a friend's crisis leaves you sleepless or a stranger's hardship haunts your commute. The Stoic question isn't, should I care? But how can I care sustainably? Epictetus offered a surprising answer. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish in matters of compassion. He knew that setting boundaries might look cold to outsiders, but real empathy isn't measured by how much you drown with someone. It's shown by how steadily you can hold their head above water. Try this exercise today. Picture hierarchical circles in your own life. Start with your innermost circle, your physical and emotional needs, then move outward, intimate relationships, colleagues, broader community. Notice where your energy flows freely and where it drains. Are you neglecting your center while overextending at the edges? Stoic compassion begins with the recognition that you can't pour from an empty cup. The next time you're tempted to sacrifice your well-being for another, remember, the Stoics saw self-care not as selfishness, but as the foundation of all enduring care. Their sensitivity wasn't fragile. It was resilient enough to bear witness to the world's pain while still believing in its healing. The Stoics understood something revolutionary about human suffering, that the sting of life's hardships doesn't come from the events themselves, but from the lenses through which we view them. Epictetus, who endured the brutality of slavery, put it plainly, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them." This wasn't just philosophy, it was a survival tool. Imagine two prisoners in the same cell. One sees only bars, while the other notices how sunlight transforms those bars into shadows that shift with the hour. Both face identical circumstances, but their perceptions create entirely different realities. The Stoics called this the discipline of perception, the practice of stripping away emotional judgments to see events as they are, not as our fears or desires paint them. Take something as mundane as a traffic jam. Most of us react instinctively: clenched jaw, frustrated sighs, mental rehearsals of excuses for being late. But what if we applied Epictetus' lens? The traffic itself isn't the problem. It's our belief that the world should conform to our schedule. The Stoic asks, is this delay truly catastrophic or just inconvenient? Could it even be an opportunity, a forced pause to listen to music, call a loved one, or observe the rhythm of the city? This shift isn't about Pollyanna-ish positivity, it's about reclaiming agency. The cars aren't moving, but your mind still can. Modern psychology validates this ancient wisdom. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches that between stimulus and response lies a space where we choose our interpretation. A coworker's curt email might trigger insecurity, "They disrespect me," or curiosity, "They must be overwhelmed." The event hasn't changed, but the emotional impact has. The Stoics were masters of this mental alchemy, turning leaden frustrations into golden insights. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, reminding himself, "Choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been." Here's how to cultivate this discipline today. Pick a recent annoyance, a cancelled flight, a rude comment, a spilled coffee. Now, interrogate your interpretation like a Stoic would. Ask, what facts do I actually know? What assumptions am I layering onto this? How might someone with a calm mind view it? You'll often find that your suffering stems not from the event, but from the story you've wrapped around it. The flight delay becomes a chance to read. The rude comment reveals more about the speaker's struggles than your worth. The spilled coffee is a tiny splash in the grand narrative of your day. This practice isn't about denying emotion, it's about discerning between what happens to us and what we tell ourselves happens. Just as a photographer adjusts focus to bring blur into clarity, Stoic perception trains us to see the raw image beneath our mental filters. And in that clear seeing lies an unexpected freedom, the power to interpret your world rather than be imprisoned by it. Marcus Aurelius kept his journal not as a record of events, but as a mirror for his soul. Late at night, after the chaos of ruling Rome, he would take up his pen and perform what he called soul surgery, peeling back layers of reaction to uncover the raw truth beneath. "Look beneath the surface," he wrote. "Let neither the peculiar quality of anything nor its value escape you." That wasn't just advice, it was his daily practice. For modern readers, his meditations feel like eavesdropping on a mind in conversation with itself, questioning every impulse, examining every judgment. What made this practice so powerful wasn't the act of writing itself, but the ruthless honesty he brought to the page. When frustration with a senator boiled up, he didn't just vent, he dissected. Why does this man's arrogance upset me? Is it because I crave respect, or because I fear being seen as weak? This is where Stoic journaling differs from today's gratitude logs or dream journals. It's not about recording what happened, but excavating why it mattered to you. Think of it as emotional archaeology. When you jot down, "My boss criticized my report," you're noting an event. But when you follow up with, "and this stung because," you're uncovering the hidden beliefs that give events their emotional charge. The Stoics recognized that our suffering rarely comes from facts themselves, but from the invisible narratives we wrap around them. Writing slows this process down, creating space between stimulus and response where wisdom grows. Here's a prompt to try tonight, straight from the Stoic playbook. Recall one moment today that stirred strong emotion, positive or negative. Describe it briefly, then ask yourself 3 questions Marcus might have posed. First, what exactly triggered this feeling? Second, what unspoken rule or expectation did this violate? Third, how might someone with perfect wisdom view this differently? This isn't about judging your reactions, but mapping their origins. You might discover that a coworker's offhand comment bothered you not because it was rude, but because it tapped into an old insecurity about being taken seriously. The magic happens when you make this a habit. After a week of these nightly excavations, patterns emerge. You'll notice how often frustration stems from unmet expectations you didn't even realize you held. You'll catch fear masquerading as anger or pride disguising itself as principle. Like Marcus, you're not just keeping a diary, you're conducting field research on your own mind. And with that awareness comes something precious, the power to choose your responses rather than being hijacked by reflexes. The page becomes a training ground where you practice the Stoic ideal of seeing clearly before acting wisely. Don't mistake this for mere self-help. The Stoics saw journaling as philosophical weightlifting, a way to strengthen your capacity for clear perception. Just as athletes review game footage to spot weaknesses, your journal lets you replay emotional reactions in slow motion, that argument you rehashed all day. On paper, you might see how your first defensive sentence escalated things, the anxiety that ruined your morning. Written down, its assumptions often crumble under scrutiny. What feels overwhelming in your head often shrinks to manageable size when pinned to the page with ink. Try this experiment. For the next 7 nights, spend 10 minutes with these 3 questions. No fancy notebook required, a scrap of paper works. The goal isn't eloquence but excavation. You're not writing for posterity but for clarity. Notice how by week's end you'll start catching yourself mid-reaction, thinking, "This feels like Tuesday's entry." That's the practice working, not eliminating emotions, but giving you the tools to navigate them with the same steady hand Marcus used to steer an empire through crisis. Because the blank page asks what the chaos of daily life rarely does. What's really happening here? And in that pause between pen and paper, you'll find the space to choose your answer. Epictetus once said, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." That pause, the Stoic breath between what happens to us and how we act, isn't just a moment of hesitation. It's an act of reclaiming sovereignty over our own minds. Picture this: you're in a team meeting when a colleague dismisses your idea with a sarcastic remark. Heat rises to your face, your pulse quickens, the ancient wiring of your brain screams to retaliate or retreat. But right there, in that sliver of time before words escape your lips, lies the Stoic superpower, the choice to observe rather than react. This isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about creating enough distance to see the situation clearly before deciding what it deserves. Imagine your mind as a courtroom. The initial sting of insult is the prosecution's opening statement, loud and compelling. But the Stoic pause calls the defense to the stand. Is this comment truly about me, or is it my colleague's own frustration speaking? Does reacting now serve my long-term goals or just my momentary pride? That split-second deliberation changes everything. What might have escalated into a public clash becomes an opportunity to respond with measured clarity. Later, in private, you might address the disrespect but on your terms, with intention rather than impulse. The modern workplace thrives on this discipline. Think of the best leaders you've known. They're not the ones who fire off emails in anger or dominate conversations. They're the ones who listen fully, pause thoughtfully, and reply with precision. A CEO I once coached described her version of the Stoic pause. She keeps a glass of water at every meeting. When tension rises, she takes a deliberate sip, creating literal space between provocation and reply. In those seconds, she asks herself Epictetus' question, what part of this can I actually control? Here's your challenge today, before your next difficult conversation, whether with a partner, a coworker, or even yourself, insert a deliberate pause. It might be 3 deep breaths, a sip of water, or simply counting to 5. Use that space to observe. What physical sensations do you notice? What assumptions are driving your emotions? The goal isn't to eliminate reaction, but to elevate response. Even one such pause can reveal a startling truth. Many battles we fight aren't with others, but with our own untrained reflexes. The Stoics knew that mastery begins not in controlling the world, but in mastering the space between what it throws at you and how you choose to catch it. Seneca likened emotional mastery to sailing, not avoiding storms, but learning to adjust your sails. A man's as miserable as he thinks he is, he wrote, but also as resilient as he trains himself to be. That's the heart of Stoic emotional agility. The ability to feel anger without becoming anger, to acknowledge grief without drowning in it. Picture an ancient mariner reading the wind. He doesn't curse the squall, he observes its direction, tightens ropes, and shifts course. Stoics approached emotions with that same precision. When envy arose, they didn't suppress it, they asked, what does this reveal about what I value? When anxiety gripped them, they didn't distract themselves, they investigated. What story am I telling myself about the future? Modern psychology calls this emotional granularity, the skill of naming subtle shades of feeling. Think of the difference between saying, I'm stressed, and pinpointing, I'm feeling overwhelmed by this deadline because I'm afraid of being seen as incompetent. That specificity is pure Stoicism in action. It's what therapist Esther Perel means when she says, the quality of your life depends on the quality of your questions. The Stoics were asking world-class questions about their emotions 16 centuries before cognitive therapy existed. Consider how this plays out today. A leader facing backlash might feel the heat of defensiveness rising. The untrained mind lashes out or retreats, but someone practicing Stoic agility pauses to dissect the reaction. Is this defensiveness protecting me or preventing growth? What part of this criticism stings because it might be true? That moment of examination transforms emotion from a tyrant to a teacher. Here's where it gets personal for you. Pick one emotion you've wrestled with recently: frustration at a slow-moving colleague, jealousy over a friend's success, anxiety about health. Now, imagine it as a weather pattern moving through you. What's its texture, its tempo? Does it feel like a sudden downpour or a lingering fog? The Stoics would urge you to go further. What hidden belief is this emotion whispering? Maybe your frustration says, things should move faster, or your jealousy mutters, I'm falling behind. These aren't facts, they're signals waiting to be decoded. Try this reframe next time that emotion surfaces. This isn't happening to me, it's happening for my understanding. Anger becomes a spotlight on your boundaries. Fear highlights what you cherish. Even envy, that uncomfortable guest, points toward unmet aspirations worth examining. The goal isn't to eliminate emotional waves, but to become the sailor who knows how to ride them, not because the sea calms, but because your skill deepens. Musonius Rufus cut to the heart of self-deception with a simple challenge. If you do something shameful, blame yourself. At first glance, it sounds harsh, but there's profound liberation in that directive. The Stoics weren't interested in self-flagellation. They were building a mirror polished enough to reflect the truth without distortion. Imagine walking through life with smudged glasses, mistaking blurry shapes for reality. That's how we operate when we avoid honest self-assessment. The Stoic practice of rigorous self-reflection wasn't about guilt, it was about clarity. They called it the discipline of assent, the habit of examining your own thoughts before accepting them as truth. Consider how easily we rationalize our shortcomings. We label procrastination as waiting for inspiration, or reframe envy as righteous indignation. Musonius saw this sleight of mind for what it was: the theft of our own growth. His remedy, daily interrogation of our actions. Not was I perfect, but where did I compromise my values today? This mirrors modern psychological findings. People who practice radical self-honesty show greater emotional resilience. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals who regularly acknowledged their flaws without defensiveness reported higher life satisfaction. The ancient Stoics would nod knowingly. They understood that sunlight disinfects wounds, and truth does the same for the soul. Here's where it gets practical. Think of a recent situation where you felt defensive, maybe a project that didn't meet expectations, or a tense conversation that left lingering resentment. Now try Musonius' approach. Strip away the justifications and ask, what was my actual role here? Not to punish yourself, but to pinpoint where your agency lived. A manager might realize their vague instructions contributed to a team's confusion. A parent might see how their impatience escalated a child's tantrum. This isn't about taking false responsibility. It's about claiming the power to improve next time. But our blind spots run deep. That's why the Stoics emphasized external mirrors too. Epictetus advised, if someone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, don't make excuses, just answer. He must not know my other faults, or he wouldn't have mentioned only these. There's humor there, but also wisdom. We need trusted others to reflect what we can't see. Modern leadership coaches call this feedback literacy, the ability to receive criticism without crumbling or counterattacking. The Stoics practiced it centuries ago, recognizing that growth requires both the courage to look inward and the humility to accept outward reflections. Try this exercise today. Ask one person who cares about your growth, a mentor, a close friend, a partner, this single question. What's one behavior of mine that might hold me back without me realizing it? Frame it as a gift request, not an interrogation. Then practice the Stoic pause, breathe before reacting, weigh their words against your own observations, and mine the response for truth without fixating on delivery. The goal isn't to adopt every critique as gospel, but to expand your self-awareness beyond the stories you tell yourself. The Stoic mirror does more than reveal flaws, it shows potential. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one," he wasn't scolding. He was pointing to the liberating truth that self-honesty isn't the enemy of self-worth, it's the foundation. Every unflinching look in the mirror clears space for who you might become, and that's where the real transformation begins. The Stoics didn't just look inward, they turned their gaze outward with the precision of astronomers studying distant stars. Seneca captured this beautifully when he advised, "Choose a master whose life, conversation, and soul-expressing face have satisfied you. Picture them always as your guardian or example." This wasn't about blind imitation. It was about conscious apprenticeship to virtue. Imagine walking through life with invisible mentors at your shoulder, Epictetus whispering patience during a delay, Marcus Aurelius offering perspective when petty frustrations arose. The Stoics understood that growth isn't solitary. We become who we surround ourselves with, even if those companions exist across centuries. History's greatest practitioners treated biography as a training ground. When Cato the Younger faced political corruption, he didn't invent integrity from scratch. He channeled the iron resolve of his ancestors. Zeno, founder of Stoicism, rebuilt his philosophy after shipwreck by studying the resilience of Socrates in Xenophon's writings. These weren't casual inspirations, they were deliberate adoptions of lived wisdom. Modern psychology confirms this. Studies show we unconsciously mimic the mannerisms and values of those we admire. The Stoics simply made it intentional. Your own life already holds these figures. Think of someone whose composure in crisis leaves you awestruck, a grandparent who weathered loss with quiet dignity, a colleague who transforms conflict into collaboration. Now go deeper. What specific traits make them your Stoic exemplar? Is it how they listen before speaking, or the way they reframe setbacks as setups? Seneca's genius was recognizing that virtues become tangible when embodied. Reading about courage is theory. Watching a firefighter charge into flames makes it real. Try this exercise today. Pick one person, living or historical, whose character resonates with your aspirations. Study them like an ethnographer. How do they open difficult conversations? What habits anchor their days? When angered, where does that energy go? You're not cloning their life, you're reverse engineering their wisdom. A young entrepreneur might dissect how Benjamin Franklin cultivated discipline through his 13 virtues. A nurse could trace Florence Nightingale's balance of compassion and boundaries. The question isn't just who inspires you, but what exactly about them lights that fire. Maybe it's Mandela's ability to lead without bitterness after 27 years imprisoned, or a teacher who treats every student as if they hold undiscovered genius. These mirrors show us our latent potential. As Marcus Aurelius wrote while ruling an empire, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. Sometimes the most stoic act is letting another's example reveal who you might become. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire that stretched from Britain to Babylon, yet his greatest lessons came not from conquest but from curiosity. Adapt yourself to the things around you, he wrote, and show true love to those with whom destiny has surrounded you. That wasn't imperial decree, it was the mindset of a perpetual student. The Stoics practiced what we might now call radical cultural humility, approaching unfamiliar customs not as threats to their worldview, but as mirrors revealing its blind spots. When Aurelius encountered Egyptian priests or Gallic chieftains, he didn't measure them against Roman standards. He asked, "What can their ways teach me about human resilience?" This approach transforms travel from sightseeing to soul-searching. Picture two visitors in a Tokyo subway station. One fumes at the inefficiency of crowded platforms, while the other marvels at the unspoken choreography of courtesy, the way strangers create order without command. Both witness the same scene, but only the Stoic traveler recognizes it as a masterclass in social harmony. Epictetus, born in Phrygia and educated in Rome, knew this dual perspective intimately. His teachings brim with examples from Scythian nomads to Athenian philosophers, not to compare superiority, but to highlight universal human struggles. Don't explain your philosophy, he advised. Embody it, especially when surrounded by those who live differently. Modern anthropology confirms what the Stoics intuited. Cultural judgments say more about the observer than the observed. Researchers call this the attribution error, assuming others' behaviors reflect character rather than context. The businessman who mistakes Nordic reserve for coldness misses the depth of loyalty beneath the surface. The backpacker who dismisses Mediterranean exuberance as chaotic overlooks centuries of social cohesion built through expressive connection. Stoic travel means suspending these snap judgments to ask, what invisible threads hold this community together? Try this experiment on your next interaction with difference, whether across borders or across the dinner table. When encountering a custom that puzzles you, replace "that's wrong" with "that's interesting." Notice how a Maasai elder's prolonged greetings reveal time as relational rather than transactional. See how Venetian shopkeepers turn mundane purchases into theatrical performances, reminding us commerce thrives on joy as much as efficiency. These aren't just observations, they're invitations to expand your emotional vocabulary. Aurelius left us perhaps the earliest definition of cosmopolitanism. My city and country are as a Roman, as the world is as a human. That vision feels urgently relevant today when algorithms feed us endless reflections of our own biases. The Stoic remedy: seek out cultural dissonance deliberately. Follow a news source that challenges your assumptions. Attend a festival where you don't know the dances. Let the discomfort of not understanding become the spark that lights deeper curiosity. Because wisdom, the Stoics knew, doesn't grow in echo chambers. It flourishes where perspectives collide and transform one another. The true souvenir of Stoic travel isn't a trinket, but a question. How many worlds exist within mine? Every encounter with difference, whether in a Moroccan souk or a co-worker's Zoom background, becomes a chance to practice what Seneca called the great art of letting things be as they are. Not uncritically, but with the humility of knowing our view is always partial. That's how observations become revelations and strangers become teachers in disguise. Solitude was the Stoics' laboratory, a place where the noise of the world faded, leaving only the raw material of their own thoughts. Seneca, who spent years exiled to Corsica, didn't just endure isolation, he mined it for wisdom. Be a spectator of your own life, he wrote, for often the truth speaks loudest in silence. That wasn't escapism, it was precision observation. Picture a jeweler examining a gem under a lamp, turning it slowly to catch flaws and facets invisible in daylight. The Stoics used solitude the same way, holding their reactions up to quiet scrutiny, discovering patterns in what others dismissed as idle time. Modern life treats solitude like a void to be filled. Podcasts during commutes, screens in waiting rooms, playlists for workouts. But the Stoics knew that in those unoccupied moments, something vital happens. Without external input, the mind begins to untangle its own knots. Think of the last time a solution struck you in the shower or on a long drive. That's not coincidence, it's your brain finally free to connect dots drowned out by daily chatter. Seneca called this conversing with yourself, not as a lonely act, but as the ultimate mentorship. His letters describe mornings spent walking alone in his villa's gardens, not to brood, but to listen, to the rustle of leaves as a metaphor for life's impermanence, to his own footsteps as a rhythm measuring time's passage. Here's how to practice Stoic solitude today. Try a 20-minute walk without devices or distractions. Not a hike for exercise, but a deliberate stroll where you become the observer. Notice how arguments from yesterday replay differently when unassisted by screens. See how anxieties shrink when exposed to open air. The goal isn't to empty your mind, but to witness its workings without interference. Like Marcus Aurelius at his writing desk or Epictetus in his humble quarters, you're creating a space where insight can rise undisturbed. But solitude isn't just about physical aloneness. It's the mental space between stimulus and reaction, that sliver of silence where choice lives. A parent locked in a bathroom for 3 deep breaths isn't hiding, they're reclaiming clarity. A CEO who blocks thinking time on their calendar isn't slacking. They're honoring Seneca's insight that leisure without study is death. Even in crowds, we can cultivate inner solitude by pausing before speaking, by listening more than planning replies, by letting a question hang in the air instead of rushing to fill it. Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly sat with your own thoughts, free from the curated voices of social media, news, or even well-meaning friends? Not to spiral into rumination, but to meet yourself with the same curiosity you'd extend to a fascinating stranger. That's the Stoic secret. Solitude isn't withdrawal from the world, but the lens that brings it into sharper focus. In the quiet, we hear not just our own heartbeat, but the pulse of what matters. Epictetus, the former slave turned philosopher, saw every encounter as a laboratory for wisdom. From everyone you meet, he instructed, learn something. That wasn't just advice, it was a methodology. The Stoics approached life with the same relentless curiosity as a scientist peering through a microscope, knowing that even the most ordinary moment held layers waiting to be examined. Imagine a botanist walking through a forest where others see just trees. They notice symbiotic relationships, survival strategies, seasonal adaptations. Stoics trained themselves to observe human nature with that same precision. When someone insulted them, they didn't just feel anger, they studied it. What does this reaction reveal about my values? What hidden wound does this interaction expose? This mindset transforms mundane interactions into field research. Consider how a physicist approaches a fallen apple. Newton didn't just see fruit, he saw a puzzle that led to gravity's laws. Similarly, when Marcus Aurelius encountered a difficult senator, he didn't merely endure the encounter, he dissected it. What fear drives this man's arrogance? What past humiliation makes him crave dominance? The questions themselves became tools for understanding rather than judgment. Modern psychology confirms this approach. Therapists call it beginner's mind, the practice of setting aside assumptions to see situations with fresh eyes. Your daily life holds these opportunities. That frustrating commute, a Stoic would observe how stress manifests in your body, the clenched jaw, the shortened breath, and ask what deeper impatience it reflects. A coworker's criticism becomes data to analyze. Is your defensiveness about the feedback itself, or the fear of inadequacy it triggers? Even joy becomes richer when examined. Why does that particular song lift your spirits? What neural pathways does it activate? This isn't overthinking, it's engaging with life at higher resolution. Try an experiment today. Pick one routine interaction and approach it like a Stoic scientist. At the coffee shop, notice how the barista's tone shifts when the line grows long. During a meeting, observe how ideas spread, who builds on others' thoughts versus interrupting. Epictetus would remind us that every person we meet is both a mirror and a lesson. The rude stranger reflects our own capacity for irritation. The kind one shows our latent generosity. The real power of this practice isn't just in observing others, it's in turning that curiosity inward. When irritation flares, ask with genuine interest, what's the source of this heat? When procrastination strikes, investigate like an anthropologist. What ancient avoidance pattern is resurfacing here? Stoic curiosity dissolves automatic reactions, replacing them with something far more potent, the choice to respond with intention rather than reflex. After all, a scientist doesn't curse unexpected results, they follow them to new discoveries. Your emotions, properly studied, can lead you to the same. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to meet life's absurdities with laughter, writing, "When bread burns or wine sours, say to yourself, these things happen. And so when people disappoint, say the same." That wasn't resignation, it was a wink at the universe's endless capacity to surprise. The Stoics didn't just endure life's frustrations, they learned to chuckle at them, not as mockery, but as a way to loosen their grip. Picture a senator tripping on his toga during a solemn procession. The crowd gasps, but the Stoic in the corner smiles not at the man's embarrassment, but at the cosmic reminder that gravity treats all egos equally. This brand of humor wasn't about deflection, it was about perspective. When Epictetus joked that a thief who steals your cloak actually does you a favor by taking something you'd have to guard, he wasn't dismissing theft. He was highlighting how easily we confuse possessions with peace of mind. Modern psychology backs this up. Studies show that people who use humor during crises recover faster, not because they avoid pain, but because laughter creates just enough distance to see challenges as temporary rather than catastrophic. Think of a tense moment in your own life that later became a funny story. Maybe you spilled coffee on your shirt before a big presentation, or autocorrect turned a professional email into gibberish. At the time, it felt like disaster, but with time, the sting faded, leaving only the absurdity. That shift isn't trivial, it's Stoic wisdom in action. Humor becomes a tool to sand down the sharp edges of misfortune, revealing the smoother wood beneath. Here's how to practice this today. Recall a recent annoyance, a missed flight, a broken phone screen, a toddler's public meltdown. Now, imagine describing it to a friend a year from now. What details might make you both laugh? The way the airport employee sighed like this was the 10th missed flight they dealt with that hour. The autocorrect that changed deadline to deadlion. The Stoics knew that tragedy plus time often equals comedy, but why wait? By anticipating the punchline, we reclaim agency over our reactions now. A nurse once told me how her team handles chaotic shifts in the ER. Instead of venting, they invent ridiculous awards. Most creative Roman IV placement, or best dramatic performance by a patient who just needs Tylenol. It's not disrespect, it's survival. Just as Marcus found lightness in imagining the gods laughing at human seriousness, these medical professionals use humor to stay grounded amid chaos. Try your own version this week. When life serves up frustration, award it an imaginary prize. Most overblown reaction to a traffic jam, or greatest misuse of a printer by technology. The act of naming the absurdity doesn't solve the problem, but it does solve your relationship to the problem. And sometimes that's enough to turn a groan into a grin, and a grin into resilience. Epictetus once described the ideal Stoic as a kind of philosopher detective, urging his students to interrogate your impressions. He wasn't talking about casual self-reflection. This was a full-scale investigation into the hidden corners of the mind. Imagine slipping into the role of a seasoned investigator, not solving crimes in the streets, but unraveling the mysteries of your own reactions. Each thought becomes a clue. Every emotional response turns into evidence, the case you're working, understanding why you think and feel the way you do. This isn't about judgment, it's about clarity. Picture a detective arriving at a chaotic crime scene. They don't start by labeling things good or bad. They observe, catalog, and ask, what story does this tell? Apply that same method to your last moment of frustration. Maybe you snapped at a coworker over a minor mistake. The Stoic detective wouldn't stop at guilt or justification. They'd trace the threads. What underlying assumption made that mistake feel personal? Was it perfectionism whispering, errors mean incompetence, or a deeper fear of being seen as inadequate. The goal isn't to prosecute yourself, but to understand the psychology behind the reaction. Try this exercise today. Conduct a thought audit for 1 waking hour, whether during your commute, a work meeting, or scrolling through social media. Keep a mental ledger. Every time you feel a strong reaction, press pause and note 3 things. 1. The trigger. 2. The immediate thought that followed. 3. The physical sensation that accompanied it. You might discover that tightness in your chest when a friend cancels plans stems not from disappointment, but from an old story about being forgotten. Or that the rush of pride when someone compliments your work reveals how much you've tied self-worth to external validation. The magic happens in the patterns. Like a detective pinning photos to a caseboard, you'll start seeing connections between seemingly isolated reactions. That irritation at your partner leaving dishes undone might share DNA with your frustration when a project at work veers off plan, both pointing to a deeper craving for control. Epictetus called this seeing the strings, recognizing how invisible beliefs pull our emotional responses. Modern therapists call it cognitive restructuring, but the Stoics were there first with their relentless curiosity about why we react the way we do. Here's where it transforms from observation to empowerment. Once you've identified a recurring mental pattern, experiment with gently challenging it. If you notice thoughts like, if I'm not productive, I'm wasting time, test that assumption. Is it universally true? Would you judge a loved one by that standard? Often we'll find these rules we live by were adopted unconsciously, absorbed from parents, culture, or past failures. The Stoic detective doesn't accept hearsay, they demand evidence for the beliefs driving their behavior. Make it tactile, carry a small notebook or use your phone to jot down these mental clues throughout the day. Don't wait until evening, capture them in real time when the emotional fingerprints are freshest. Over time, you'll compile your own psychological dossier, revealing the recurring characters in your mental drama: the perfectionist, the people-pleaser, the catastrophizer. Naming them weakens their hold, like exposing a suspect in a lineup. What makes this approach uniquely Stoic is its blend of compassion and rigor. A bad detective jumps to conclusions. A great one remains open to all possibilities while following the evidence. When you catch yourself thinking, "This always happens to me," the Stoic method asks, is that factual, or is it a narrative I've repeated until it feels true? The interrogation isn't an inquisition, it's an act of reclaiming authorship over your inner world. By day's end, you might not have solved every mystery of your mind, but you'll have something more valuable: the awareness that your thoughts are not facts, but hypotheses waiting to be tested. And that's where true freedom begins, not in controlling every impression, but in choosing which ones deserve your belief. Seneca wrote letters that sparkled with gratitude for the ordinary: a warm bath, a friend's letter, the taste of fresh bread. True happiness, he insisted, is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future. That wasn't just optimism, it was a discipline of attention. The Stoics didn't wait for grand gestures to feel thankful. They trained themselves to spot grace notes in the daily symphony others tuned out. Picture a Roman senator pausing mid-stride to watch sunlight dance on a fountain, or Epictetus savoring the weight of a clay cup in his calloused hands. These weren't random moments of appreciation. They were acts of resistance against the human tendency to overlook what's always there. Modern research confirms what the Stoics practiced. Gratitude isn't just a feeling, it's a way of seeing. Neuroscientists find that regularly noting small positives rewires the brain's negativity bias, like sunlight shifting shadows. A nurse I once met carried this practice through grueling hospital shifts. She'd pause to appreciate the way an elderly patient's hands folded around a teacup, or the dark humor shared between colleagues in the break room. It's not about ignoring suffering, she explained, but about refusing to let it blind you to everything else. That's Stoic gratitude in action, not denying life's harshness, but balancing its weight with deliberate counterweights of light. Here's a practice straight from Seneca's playbook. Each evening, name 3 unremarkable things that sustained you today. Not the promotion or the vacation, the steam rising from your morning coffee, the way your child's hair smells after a bath, the stranger who held the elevator. The Stoics called this taking inventory, not to tally debts but to witness abundance hiding in plain sight. When Marcus Aurelius journaled about the lessons he learned from others, even those who irritated him, he was doing more than counting blessings. He was honing his capacity to find teachers everywhere. Try this tonight. List 3 things you usually overlook. The hum of your refrigerator, proof of electricity's miracle. The wear pattern on your favorite shoes, mapping journeys taken. The way your breath automatically fills your lungs, a partnership with gravity you didn't negotiate. The Stoics knew gratitude isn't passive, it's a muscle that strengthens with use. And in a world obsessed with chasing more, the ability to be nourished by what's already here might be the most subversive wisdom of all. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Everything has its beauty, but not everyone sees it." That simple line holds the key to a profound Stoic practice, turning observation into an art form. The Stoics didn't just train themselves to endure life's roughness, they learned to find the sublime in its cracks and crevices. Think of a Japanese kintsugi bowl where golden lacquer highlights broken edges instead of hiding them. What most would discard, the artist elevates. That's the Stoic gaze in action, seeing fractures not as flaws but as part of an object's unique history. When Marcus marveled at the fig tree doing fig tree things, he wasn't being poetic. He was practicing radical attention to the ordinary miracles others overlook. Art museums offer the perfect laboratory for this mindset. Stand before a Van Gogh painting, and most see swirling colors. But a Stoic observer would go deeper, noticing how each frantic brushstroke captures the artist's restless energy, how thick paint layers create textures begging to be touched. That almond blossom branch isn't just flora, it's Van Gogh's desperate prayer for hope after his brother's child was born. The Stoic approach transforms passive viewing into active dialogue. What's this piece trying to teach me about resilience, about joy, about the artist's struggle to make meaning? Try this exercise today. Choose one artwork, a street mural, a child's drawing, even the play of shadows on your bedroom wall, and study it like a Stoic would. First, describe its physical details with forensic precision. The way charcoal smudges fade at the edges, how afternoon light turns dust motes into floating gold. Then ask what makes this beautiful, not by textbook standards, but by its honest expression of existence. A crack in your coffee mug isn't damage, it's the mark of morning shared, of warmth held. Now turn that lens outward. When was the last time you truly saw the barista's hands as they tamp espresso, the calluses from countless pulls, the rhythm honed through repetition? Or noticed how rain transforms your city into a shimmering maze of reflections? The Stoic artist isn't a passive bystander to beauty. They're an active participant, uncovering splendor in what others dismiss as background noise. Share your findings. Tell someone about the way rust patterns on a park bench resembled a mountain range, or how a stranger's laughter carried the same cadence as wind chimes. Because when Marcus wrote, "The universe is change, our life is what our thoughts make it," he wasn't just philosophizing, he was handing us a brush to repaint our world with deeper noticing. What color will you add today? Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire with the same care a gardener tends to delicate shoots, attentive to the needs beneath the surface. His journal reveals a leader who saw power not as privilege but as responsibility. Men exist for one another, he wrote. Either teach them better or bear with them. That wasn't empty idealism. It was the foundation of his governance. Picture the emperor pausing mid-stride during military campaigns to hear a common soldier's concern, or rewriting laws to protect orphans after noticing their vulnerability. His strength came not from ignoring human complexity, but from navigating it with the precision of a scholar studying ancient texts. Modern leaders who master this balance share a common thread. They lead with their eyes wide open. Take Jacinda Ardern, New Zealand's former Prime Minister, who responded to a terrorist attack by naming each victim in Parliament, then swiftly reforming gun laws. Like Marcus, she demonstrated that true command requires both the clarity to act and the sensitivity to see what others miss. When she said, "Empathy doesn't weaken leadership, it defines it," she echoed Stoic principles 2,000 years in the making. The best leaders aren't those who suppress emotion, but those who harness observation as a strategic tool. This transforms how we view authority. A Stoic leader in a boardroom doesn't dismiss an employee's frustration, they investigate its roots. Is this exhaustion speaking or a genuine systemic flaw? A coach guiding athletes doesn't just drill skills, they notice the subtle slump in a player's posture that signals waning confidence. Epictetus, though never an emperor, captured this perfectly. Know first who you are, then adorn yourself accordingly. Leadership begins with self-awareness, then extends outward like concentric circles in water. Consider your own sphere of influence, whether managing a team, parenting, or guiding a community project. How might you apply Marcus's advice to approach each task as if it were your last with meticulous attention? Try this exercise today. In your next interaction requiring guidance, pause for 30 seconds of pure observation before speaking. Notice body language, listen for unspoken concerns beneath words, and ask yourself, what's not being said here? The Stoics called this prosoch mindful presence, and it's what separates reactive bosses from transformative leaders. The lesson isn't about softness versus strength, but about redefining where true power lies. When Marcus wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good leader should be one," he wasn't demanding perfection. He was inviting us to lead as we'd wish to be led, with eyes that see beyond surfaces and the courage to act on what we find. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who believed philosophy should be practiced in kitchens as much as classrooms, offered radical advice to parents. Children learn virtue not by hearing, but by seeing. That simple statement flips modern parenting on its head. We obsess over curriculums and correct punishments, while the Stoics focused on something far more powerful, the silent education of watched moments. Picture a toddler mimicking a parent's posture during a phone call, or a teenager unconsciously adopting a caregiver's tone when frustrated. These aren't just habits, they're living lessons in what it means to be human. Consider a scene every parent knows, the grocery store meltdown. A child screams for candy, face flushed with desire, while bystanders shoot judgmental glances. The typical scripts run through your mind: bargaining, threats, surrender. But the Stoic parent sees this differently. It's not just a behavioral challenge, it's a masterclass in emotional archaeology. That tantrum isn't defiance, it's a small human encountering the gap between want and reality for the first time. Your reaction, whether clenched jaw compliance or knee-jerk anger, becomes their blueprint for handling disappointment. When Musonius advised teaching by example, he wasn't suggesting perfection. He meant showing the struggle itself with transparency, taking a visible breath before responding, naming your own frustration aloud. "I'm feeling impatient too," modeling how desires can be acknowledged without being obeyed. The real test comes in unseen moments. How you speak about a neighbor when you think little ears aren't listening. The way you handle a missed promotion at dinner. Your relationship with technology when no one's policing your screen time. Stoic parenting recognizes that children are relentless anthropologists, studying the culture of your home through 1,000 tiny observations. Marcus Aurelius, raising his son Commodus amid imperial pressures, wrote reminders to himself like, "Let your children see you striving," and "Better to trip honestly than stand perfectly through pretense." Even emperors understood that vulnerability, when paired with intention, becomes the strongest lesson. Try this exercise today. Pick one routine interaction with your child, maybe tying their shoes or reviewing homework, and approach it as if it's being recorded for their future self. Not to perform perfection, but to model process. Narrate your patience when the knot won't hold. Show curiosity about a wrong answer instead of frustration. The goal isn't to eliminate mistakes, but to demonstrate how a mature human handles them. Because long after they've forgotten your lectures, they'll remember the way you sighed as you untangled that shoelace for the 3rd time and chose to laugh instead of snap. Stoicism transforms parenting from a series of reactions to a practice of visible growth. When your teenager rolls their eyes at your advice, resist the urge to escalate. Instead, channel Epictetus' insight. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen to what's beneath their defiance, often fear of inadequacy disguised as rebellion. Your calm in that storm doesn't just de-escalate the moment. It plants seeds for how they'll someday navigate conflict with their own children. The most powerful inheritance you can pass down isn't wealth or wisdom, but the living proof that humans can face life's chaos with both sensitivity and strength. Tonight, as you tuck them in, ask yourself, what did my actions teach today? Not the grand speeches, but the offhand comments. Not the planned lessons, but the spontaneous reactions. Because parenting, the Stoics knew, isn't about molding children into ideal versions of ourselves. It's about becoming the kind of person we hope they might choose to emulate, one observed moment at a time. Seneca once described true friendship as a partnership of souls, where 2 people become guardians of each other's growth. For the Stoics, friendship wasn't about casual companionship, it was an exercise in profound attention. They cultivated bonds not through grand gestures, but through the radical act of seeing someone fully, beyond their roles and masks. Imagine walking through life with companions who notice when your laugh doesn't reach your eyes, who remember the story behind your hesitation when certain topics arise. That Stoic friendship, a mirror held up with such clarity that both parties emerge wiser. This practice began with listening beyond words. When Seneca wrote, "A friend is a second self," he wasn't suggesting clones, but urging us to approach others with the same curiosity we reserve for our own thoughts. Picture 2 philosophers in ancient Athens, sitting not face to face but shoulder to shoulder, gazing at the horizon as they spoke. Their posture revealed a key insight. Real listening happens when we stop performing attention and start sharing perspective. Modern research confirms this. Studies show people feel most heard when listeners engage in sideways attention, focusing outward together rather than maintaining intense eye contact that can feel interrogative. Try this exercise today. Invite a friend for a walk without destinations or devices. As they speak, resist the urge to relate everything back to your own experiences. Instead, notice the textures of their speech, where their voice quickens with passion, where it falters with uncertainty. Epictetus taught that every person we meet carries fragments of wisdom we lack. Your talkative coworker might reveal resilience beneath their chatter. Your quiet neighbor could demonstrate the power of measured speech. Stoic friendship means collecting these lessons like seashells, not for display, but for the quiet understanding they provide. Now turn that lens inward. Who in your life have you been viewing through outdated impressions? The classmate you still think of as shy, though they've grown confident. The sibling you label irresponsible based on teenage mistakes. Seneca warned against this, writing, "We love friends not as they are, but as we wish them to be." Stoic friendship demands we wipe our mental chalkboards clean regularly, allowing people to redefine themselves in our eyes. Here's your challenge. Reach out to someone you've neglected, not with guilt, but with renewed attention. Maybe it's the friend who always asks thoughtful questions but rarely shares their own struggles. Or the mentor whose advice you took without ever telling them how it shaped you. Don't apologize for the silence. Simply say, "I was thinking about when you mentioned." And name a specific insight they once shared. That's Stoic friendship in action, honoring the invisible threads that connect us by making them visible again. Because in the end, the strongest bonds aren't forged in grand moments, but in the accumulated weight of small, attentive acts. Like Marcus Aurelius writing notes of encouragement to his teacher Fronto during dark times. Or Seneca's letters that asked probing questions about his friends' inner lives rather than gossiping about external events. These weren't just kindnesses, they were practices in the art of human observation, reminding us that to truly know another is perhaps the most stoic discipline of all. Cato the Younger stood on the battlefield not with blind aggression, but with the sharpened gaze of a tactician who understood that victory begins long before the first sword is drawn. Ancient historians recorded how he would study terrain with the precision of a cartographer, noting how sunlight angled through valleys at dawn, where loose stones might trip advancing troops, how the wind carried sounds across plains. This wasn't just military strategy, it was Stoicism in motion. Every observation became data, every detail a variable in the equation of survival. When Epictetus later declared, "What matters isn't what happens, but how you meet it," he might as well have been describing Cato's approach, preparation and perception fused into a single discipline. Modern athletes embody this same principle. Watch a champion tennis player between points. They're not just catching their breath. Their eyes trace the court's geometry, noting worn patches where serves often land. They adjust their grip minutely based on humidity's effect on the strings. Like Cato surveying a battlefield, they understand that mastery lies in the marriage of awareness and adaptation. Basketball legend Michael Jordan described this as being in the zone, but Stoics would call it prosoch, the art of full presence. The soldier and the athlete share a crucial insight. Peak performance isn't about suppressing nerves, but channeling them through relentless observation. Epictetus, who trained young Romans at his philosophy school, made this explicit. Opportunity dances with those already on the dance floor. His students didn't just memorize maxims, they drilled mental rehearsals. Before facing insults, they practiced measured responses. Before potential loss, they visualized detachment. This wasn't wishful thinking, it was cognitive conditioning. A boxer shadow boxing before a match, a surgeon running through instrument sequences before an operation. These are modern echoes of the Stoics' mental dojo. The goal isn't to predict every scenario, but to cultivate such fluid awareness that no scenario catches you entirely unprepared. Here's how to apply this today. Choose one upcoming challenge, a difficult conversation, a creative project deadline, even a household task you've been avoiding. Now, borrow Cato's method. First, survey the terrain. What physical and emotional factors will shape this moment? A morning meeting might hinge on your colleagues' caffeine habits. An evening negotiation might turn on everyone's fatigue levels. Next, conduct a mental reconnaissance. Imagine 3 possible obstacles and your responses. If technology fails during your presentation, will you panic or pivot to a whiteboard discussion? If your child melts down at the grocery store, will you react with frustration or redirect with a game? This isn't about controlling outcomes, it's about strengthening your capacity to engage skillfully with whatever arises. The true Stoic warrior knows that battles are won in the quiet moments before chaos erupts. Like a chess master studying patterns until they become instinct, or a firefighter drilling protocols until muscle memory takes over, we prepare not to eliminate uncertainty, but to move through it with clarity. Your next challenge might not involve swords or stadiums, but the same principles apply. Observe deeply, anticipate wisely, and meet each moment not with rigid expectations, but with the adaptable readiness of someone who has already walked the terrain in their mind. That's where awareness becomes action and preparation transforms into possibility. Seneca wrote that old age is a harbor after a long voyage, not a shipwreck, but a natural destination worthy of its own beauty. The Stoics didn't view aging as decline. They saw it as an advanced course in observation, where life's repetitions revealed patterns invisible to younger eyes. Picture an olive tree that bears fruit for centuries. Its gnarled trunk tells stories the smooth sapling can't yet understand. That's the Stoic approach to growing older, not resisting time's passage but studying its curriculum. When Seneca remarked, "Old age adds more dignity to those who are already dignified," he wasn't flattering vanity. He was highlighting how accumulated experience sharpens perception, letting us distinguish fleeting concerns from enduring truths. Consider the Japanese practice of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold. The cracks aren't hidden, they're illuminated. Aging offers a similar alchemy. A grandmother's hands, lined with decades of labor, don't just show wear, they map resilience. The slower pace that frustrates many in later years becomes, through a Stoic lens, an opportunity to notice what hurried youth overlooks. The way sunlight slants differently through autumn leaves, or how a grandchild's laughter echoes childhood's long past. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled Rome in his 50s, wrote, "Observe how all things are continually being born of change, not with bitterness but with the awe of someone who'd learned to read time's language." There's a story about an elderly Stoic teacher who, when students pitied his trembling hands, held up a cup and said, "See how the water shakes, that's how you know it's alive." His point wasn't poetic deflection, it was a masterclass in reframing. Where society saw frailty, he demonstrated ongoing participation in life's rhythm. Modern science validates this perspective. Studies on positivity effect show older adults often prioritize meaningful connections over trivial conflicts, naturally embodying Epictetus' advice to focus on what's truly yours. Your current life phase, whether you're navigating the chaos of young adulthood or the quieting of later years, holds specific lessons only this season can teach. A parent in their 40s might discover patience through teenage rebellion. A retiree could uncover creativity in newly unstructured days. The Stoic question isn't, how do I stay young? But what becomes visible now that wasn't before? Like a photographer adjusting focus, each decade reveals details the previous one blurred. Try this practice today. Identify one change your age has brought. Perhaps less physical stamina but more emotional steadiness, or fading memory for names but sharper recall for meaningful moments. Then ask Seneca's favorite question, how can this serve? Maybe your creaky knees encourage mindfulness with each step, or your accumulated regrets become cautionary tales for younger friends. Stoic aging means trading the anxiety of "what am I losing?" for the curiosity of "what's being revealed?" Because the ultimate gift of growing older isn't wisdom itself, it's the trained eye to recognize it where it's always been. Marcus Aurelius ended his days not with exhaustion, but with inquiry, sitting by lamplight to ask himself two piercing questions. What harm did I undo today? And what good did I begin? This nightly ritual wasn't self-judgment, it was soul-tending. The Stoics called it anachoresis, a deliberate retreat into reflection, like a gardener inspecting each plant's growth at dusk. Picture it, after the chaos of ruling Rome, Marcus would unroll his parchment and dissect his day with the precision of a watchmaker examining gears. When you have trouble getting out of bed, he wrote, remember your purpose, to live as a human. That simple reminder reframed his entire evening review, not as tallying wins and losses, but as realigning with humanity itself. Your own version of this practice requires no imperial trappings, just honesty and a few quiet minutes. Start with 3 questions adapted from Epictetus' disciples. First, where did my actions align with my values today? Maybe you listened fully during a friend's crisis instead of rehearsing advice. Second, where did I act out of character, perhaps snapping at a barrister when rushing revealed lingering stress? Third, and most Stoic, what did this teach me about where I'm still growing? That irritation at your partner's tardiness might trace back to an unexamined need for control, not their punctuality. The magic lies in the details. Don't just note, was patient with kids. Describe the exact moment you breathed through frustration when they spilled milk. Like a scientist recording lab observations, specificity reveals patterns. A CEO client of mine discovered through this practice that her leadership mistakes often happened mid-afternoon, a clue pointing to decision fatigue. She began scheduling critical meetings for mornings, transforming her effectiveness. Try this tonight. Set a phone reminder for 15 minutes before bed. Find any scrap of paper, the back of a receipt works, and divide it into 2 columns. Label one, saw clearly, the other, blurred by. In the first, jot moments you responded wisely, pausing before a reactive email, noticing a colleague's slumped shoulders and offering support. In the second, note reactions you'd recalibrate, muttering about traffic, postponing a hard conversation. Then ask Seneca's favorite question. If this were my last night, would I want these to be my final lessons? What makes this practice uniquely Stoic is its lack of self-scolding. When Marcus wrote, you don't have to turn this into something, it doesn't have to upset you, he was training himself in objective observation. Your journal isn't a courtroom, it's a workshop. That entry about losing your temper in traffic, it's data revealing a trigger, maybe rushed mornings or unresolved work tension, not evidence of failure. The longer you sustain this ritual, the more it reshapes your days. You'll catch yourself thinking mid-argument. This will be interesting to reflect on tonight, creating instant space between impulse and action. Like a sculptor stepping back to assess their work from multiple angles, these nightly pauses let you spot rough edges while the clay's still soft. And over time, as Epictetus promised, what you engrave in your mind, you'll find in your life. So tonight, before sleep claims you, borrow Marcus' lamp, not to dwell on regrets, but to gather the day's gifts, the stumbles that taught, the joys that rooted you deeper in what matters. Because the Stoics knew something profound, nights spent reflecting consciously lead to mornings lived more awake. Epictetus asked his students a jarring question: why fear death when you're not even afraid of sleep? The Stoics didn't treat mortality as a morbid fixation. They saw it as the ultimate lens for focusing a meaningful life. Imagine holding an hourglass where the top bulb isn't just sand, but every unrealized dream, every postponed conversation, every someday gathering dust. That's the Stoic perspective. Death isn't the enemy of existence, it's the curator. Seneca put it bluntly, it's not that we have too little time, but that we waste so much of it. This clarity transformed how they lived. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now, let that determine what you do and say," he wasn't promoting anxiety. He was engineering urgency. Picture a sculptor working in melting ice. Each stroke carries weight because the medium is fleeting. Modern psychology confirms this principle. Terminally ill patients often report an ironic surge of vitality once they stop postponing joy. The Stoics achieved that same aliveness without waiting for diagnosis. They practiced what hospice workers call the double awareness, holding mortality in one hand and life's sweetness in the other, without either negating the other. Consider two neighbors tending gardens. One obsesses over future blooms, fretting about pests and weather. The other kneels in the dirt now, fingers tracing today's petals, knowing frost comes for every rose. The Stoic choice is clear: reverence without delusion. Legacy isn't built in some distant when. It's the residue of daily choices. A teacher's legacy lives in students who still hear her encouragement decades later. A parent endures in a child's instinct to comfort others because they were comforted. Try this exercise today. Write your own obituary, not the sanitized version for newspapers, but the unflinching truth you'd want read aloud by someone who knew your soul. What relationships did you nurture? What fears did you outgrow? Which comforts did you sacrifice for growth? The Stoics called this the view from above, zooming out until pettiness falls away. When a CEO client did this, she realized her frantic networking masked a longing for real connection. She now hosts intimate dinners where phones stay in the hall. Here's the paradox: by staring at life's finitude, the Stoics found its infinite depth. Like museum visitors before a masterpiece, knowing the exhibit closes at 5 doesn't ruin the art, it makes us lean closer. Your mortality isn't a threat, it's the signature on your lease for this precious, temporary space. As Epictetus might say, you've been given a role. Play it well, but remember, it's not yours forever. That's not morbid, it's liberation dressed in truth. The hourglass flows, but your fingers get to shape the sand while it falls. We've spent this journey unraveling one of Stoicism's best-kept secrets. The greatest Stoic minds weren't unfeeling statues. They were master observers, attuned to life's subtleties with near-surgical precision. Their strength didn't come from shutting out the world, but from leaning into it with eyes wide open. Think of Marcus Aurelius dissecting his own irritations like a scientist studying a rare specimen, or Seneca tracing grief's contours with the care of a cartographer mapping uncharted land. This is the heart of Stoic resilience, not numbness, but the courage to see clearly, then choose wisely. The practices we've explored aren't relics, they're tools for modern living. Journaling becomes soul archaeology, unearthing the hidden beliefs driving your reactions. The Stoic pause transforms heated moments into spaces where wisdom can breathe. Reframing turns obstacles into puzzles waiting to be solved. Even premeditatio malorum, the rehearsal of challenges, isn't pessimism. It's emotional inoculation, preparing you to meet storms without being swept away. These aren't exercises in self-denial. They're acts of profound self-respect, honoring your capacity to engage deeply without being overwhelmed. Seneca, who wrote letters brimming with warmth even as he faced exile, left us a compass for this path. Life is long if you know how to use it. That's the invitation Stoicism extends: not to escape feeling, but to feel with intention. To notice the way sunlight slants through your window in the morning and recognize it as fleeting gift. To catch the tightening in your chest during conflict and ask what story you're telling yourself. To see aging not as decline, but as an advanced seminar in what truly matters. So here's your challenge for 1 week: live as an observer, not a passive bystander, but an active participant in your own experience. When frustration flares, trace its roots like Marcus tracking thoughts in his journal. When joy appears, savor it with Seneca's gratitude for small wonders. And when life feels chaotic, remember Epictetus' reminder that you're not just a leaf in the wind. You're the one who decides what meaning to assign the storm. The comments are open for your discoveries. What did observing reveal to you this week? Where did you find strength in sensitivity? Share your insights below. And if this perspective resonated, subscribe for more journeys into Stoic wisdom. Because the truth we've uncovered together changes everything. The path to resilience isn't through detachment, it's through paying attention, moment by moment, with the courage to see what's really there.